Dear students and participants of the course on railway engineering, we are back with our lectures and discussion. And today we are going to talk about the joints in rails, and more specifically within the joints in rails we will be talking about insulated joints and the welded joints. Now if you remember, we started discussing about the joints in the previous lecture itself, and in that lecture we did talk about the effects and requirements of the joints, the avoidances where the joint shall not be provided, how the joints can be maintained or what should be done for maintaining the joints. And then the classification of joints were taken up, wherein the two types of classification, one by the position on the sleeper and another the position of the rail joint. Altogether these two things were taken up. Towards the end we started discussing about the spatial joints, and within spatial joints we did talk about the SEJs. So, that is one type of a joint, the switch expansion joint. Apart from that, within the spatial category there can be the insulated joints, and then finally the joints which are being used nowadays on Indian railways, that is welded joints. So, our today discussion is going to be on insulated joints, and then we will be taking up the welded joints, and within welded joints there are different types of techniques which can be used so as to weld the two rails together. We will see that how much we can cover, and if left then that will be continued in the next lecture. Now starting with the insulated joints. Now insulated joints, these are used to insulate the electrically circuited tracks. From the name itself you can make it out. So there is a joint being provided, but some insulation has been used here, and this is being done on either side of the track. That means if you are providing a rail in this form and it has a joint here, and at this particular joint we have provided a fish plate with the bolts, then some insulation has been done at this location, and that is to insulate in terms of the electrically circuited tracks. Now normally these are made out of ordinary fish plates. There is nothing different than the fish plates which are there as a fastening between one rail and the another rail. These two rails are there, and this one is the fish plate. So this is an ordinary fish plate, but then there are few things which will be done all along this fish plate so that it becomes an insulated joint. And these are placed on the fishing planes for accommodating the channel type insulation between the rails and the fish plates. That means somewhere at the back. So if we talk about the thickness in this form, so that is a fish plate being provided here. So at the back of it, so there is an insulation being done. So this is what it says. So there is accommodates a channel type insulation between the rails and the fish plates with ferrules and bushes over the fish bolts. So we have the fish bolts here. So at the top of the fish bolt, say if you talk about a section, so there will be a bolt in this form. So there is some insulation being used here in terms of the ferrules or bushes over the fish bolts, and as well as there are end posts between the rail ends. So these are the rail ends. At this point here the end post is also provided. So this is another aspect, and these are laid as the square joints. If you remember, we talked about the joints in the rail sections. So a square joint means if there is a joint here, then opposite to that there is another joint. Similarly, if a joint is here, then this way. So this is a square joint condition. This we have discussed in the previous lecture. Now if a staggered cannot be avoided, and which is going to be there in the case of a curved track, because the length here on the outer rail is higher as compared to the length on the inner rail. So, if a joint is appearing at this point on an inner rail, it may happen that it is coming in this position. So, this is a staggered condition which we have already discussed. Then the distance between the staggered joints should not exceed the minimum wheel base of the vehicle. So, at the top of this a train is going to move, there is wagon, there is a locomotive, and within the wagon, if you talk about a wagon body, so there will be bogies here which are provided. So, they have the wheelbase. So, that wheelbase which we are talking, it should not exceed the minimum wheelbase. So, it should be in that form, the locations, the distances between these. The battered rail ends must be put right. So, battered rail end is a rail end which is going in this form. This is the end of the rail at the joint. So, there is a battering effect. So, these needs to be first of all made correct. It should not happen that we have this type of a system and then we simply just join the two rails. So, before insulation, that is to be corrected, and the gap between the rails, it should be equal to the thickness of the end post. So, previously we said that there is an end post being inserted at this location. So, whatever is the gap which we are considering here between the rails and the thickness of the end post, they should match each other. So, this is another requirement which needs to be looked at when we are going for insulation. Then all rough edges and bonds, they should be removed from the bolt holes. So, we have a bolt hole. So, even if we are talking about a rail section like this and it is to be connected by a fish plate, then there will be hole here as well as here. Similarly, a hole here and another hole here. At the top of that, now we are going to place our fish plate in this form. So, there will be hole in this manner. So, this is a fish plate. So, all rough edges or burrs, they should be removed from these holes. So, it has to be smoothened in that manner. Now, here one of the figure or the diagram has been given, which is of an insulated joint. Now, you can see that this is the rail section, a flat footed rail is being shown. Then there is a fish plate being provided and it is setting with respect to the fishing angles. So, the fishing angles are here, these are the fishing angles. So, it should be matching with those angles, then only there will be a good contact, there will be transfer of the stresses. And here there is a fish bolt. So, this one is a fish bolt which is passing through the hole in the rail as well as in the fish plates. So, they are going to be this fish bolts and there will be 4 number of nuts which will be used. Then at the top of this fish bolt a bush is used. So, there is a bush at the top and then there is another bush at the bottom. So, this is also a bush. So, it means there are two, this way the bush is going to be there in terms of the round section. So, you can look at in this form, we are looking at the cross section here. So, this is a say the bolt. So, there will be a bush being provided and then apart from bush there is a ferrule, 4 numbers will be there. Fish plate is on both the sides. So, this is also a fish plate and the another one is also a fish plate. So, 2 numbers of the fish plates are going to be there at one joint. Then insulated plate is being given here. So, this is a hatched area. So, this hatched area is insulated plate. So, that is how now the insulation is coming in play. You have a bolt which is also being provided with those things and then apart from that here also you can see something is being provided, that is a backing plate. So, a backing plate is provided and then at top of that then the bolt is being inserted and the nuts are being screwed on the top of it. So, that is how this type of an arrangement is being made in the case of insulated joint. So, proper insulation will come here, and if anything wrong goes to the insulating plate, then that insulation will be not available. Now, another type of insulated joint is defined as a glued insulated joint. This is on the basis of the adhesives which are going to be used. So, what it says is that these joints consist of the web fitting fish plates. This is always going to be there, that has to fit in with the fishing planes, which are glued to the rails. And for doing that gluing, what we use is a high polymer adhesive. So, this high polymer adhesive is being provided on the fish plate, and then that fish plate is being pressed on the rail, and then it is being bolted. And for bolting, what we are using, this is a normal thing, nothing special here. High tensile steel bolts are being used for doing that. So, when we are talking about the fastenings, we will be talking about the fish plates, we will be talking about the bolts and nuts also there. And within these fish plates, which at the moment which we are talking as a normal fish plate, or it can also be defined as a standard fish plate. Apart from that, there can be a combination fish plate or a joggled fish plate. Now, this insulation is provided by special type of insulating side channels, bushes, and the end post, which are made of fiberglass cloth roving. So, this fiberglass cloth roving, this is being used to create end posts, to create bushes, to create the side channels, and then they are being placed as an insulating material between the rail and the fish plate. Now, in the case of long welded rails or a continuously welded rails tracks, the glued joints, they are being defined in terms of a category. So, here the glued joint is G3L for LWR and CWR, and this G3L is with 6 bolts. Whereas, in the case of the SWR, then in that case, or FR track, then in that case it is G3S. In this case there will be 4 bolts. So, this is a classification which is used by Indian Railways, and depending on what type of track has been laid down, this glued joint is being provided. Now, here we can see the glued insulated joint. So, instead of the many types of packings which were there, now what you can see is there is a layer of adhesion. So, there is this layer of adhesion being provided at the top of the fish plate. So, we have this fish plate here as well as here on both sides of the rail, and then up at the top of this adhesive layer there is an insulating liner. This insulating liner is being placed, so which is shown as hatch area, and they are going to fit in all of this geometry as per the geometry of the rail as well as the fish plates, because they are going to be get connected along these fishing planes as well as the straight sections on the web. And these bolts are being used. So, the number as far as the specification is concerned, so it is a T1364 which we are talking here. And apart from that, there is a punched washer which is used at the top of the bolt when it is being provided in this form, in the hole which is passing through the fishing plate as well as through the web of the rail section. So, these are the way it is going to be worked. And here another thing which is being used, as we discussed, that there is going to be an insulating end post. So, in that insulating end post is also provided. So, what it says is that all the bolts which are used, they should be tightened to 20 tons tension, and this 20-ton tension is being considered in such a manner that it is not very high as well as not very low. It is an adequate value. If you are going for a more tightening, then there will not be a movement. If you are not tightening it adequately, then there will be again the loosening of the packing. Then all radii shall be 2 mm except where otherwise they have been shown in all of these cases. Now, in the case of these insulated joints, they can be further be classified as certain categories here. So, the first one is the category 1. This category 1 is developed for the continuously welded rails, and these continuously welded rails, they are mostly used on the heavy density lines where the lot of traffic is there. We discussed about this heavy density lines in the very introduction of this course. There we said that there are high density routes or there is highly utilized routes. Then this high strength bolted and bounded insulating rail joints are provided. So, the bolt is being provided and the bounding value material is being provided in terms of packings or in terms of liners. Then use of shorter rail length, the fish plates with 4 high strength bolts they are used. So, this is a normal type of a fish plate which will be there. In the case of LWR, we talked about that there will be 6 bolt assembly, and that 6 bolt assembly was defined by a code, and that code was what? If you go back and see that was G3L. So, for L it is a LWR and G3 is a condition, and then it in the case of LWR then it is going for 6 bolt system. It removed only at the time of rail removal, otherwise these is not being removed, and reduces the incidences of the traffic disruptions and it improves the service life. So, once we go for these type of insulated joints, it has a big impact in terms of the service life, and here you are trying to match the service life with respect to the rail, with respect to the sleeper and the other components of the fastenings which otherwise are also being used. And this service life is going to be improved due to different reasons. Now, what are those reasons? There is a head hardening of the rail ends, and this head hardening is being done by using certain thermal processes. So, we will be talking about this type of an aspect maybe further, but at the moment we cannot simply understand if the rail ends have been processed thermally. So, they have been heated. So, there is a head hardening thing which happens, and that is increasing the life, because the battering at that point will not be there, and what you have done is that these two sections which have been combined together by way of the material being filled here. So, they remains in a position. Then superior glue technology is being used, and because of that again the service life is going to improve upon. High quality polymer for end post and bushes are being used. So, that is another aspect of improving the service life, and the cold expansion of bolt holes is used instead of a hot temperature. Now, what happens here is that all of these things, there are temperatures which are defined as the mean rail temperature. There is a temperature which is defined as an installation temperature. So, when we are talking about this temperature difference which happens, which will cause the thermal stresses in the overall rail system. Now, here if we do this cold expansion of the bolt holes, that means it is being done at a temperature lower than the stipulated temperature, then it also improves the fatigue life. Then forged fish plates of thicker section and superior steel, this when we are using, then that is also helping in improving upon the life, because now you have a better sections which can take more of the loads. And improved thermit welding technique. So, this is one of the techniques. There can be gas pressure techniques, there can be flash butt welding techniques. So, there are different type of techniques, electrical welding techniques or electric arc welding techniques, those type of things are already there. Here we are talking that we are using a thermit welding technique, and that improves the life. Then let us talk about the category 2. The category 2 is non-bounded type of insulated rail joints. So, they are not bounded, used as web fitting fish plates with 4 or 6 fish bolts. Now, here there is an option depending on which particular track it is being done. It can be with the 4 bolt system or 6 bolt system, that is G3L or G3S condition can be there. Longer 6 bolted fish plates can be used on LWR, and this longer 6 bolted fish plates, they are usually around 1 meter or 0.95 meter long as compared to the normal fish plates, which is roughly around 700 mm or 70 centimeters, around that. There is no application of glue or additional insulating liners, they are not being used in this particular case. The end post between the butting rail ends is insulated, and the service life in this case is more than 10 years. So, here the service life is not very high, but yes, it is more than 10 years, so it can be used on normal smaller tracks where the traffic is not very high. Now, there are two types of non-conducting fish plates which are used. One is the made of solid fiber glass reinforced plastic, Scotch ply or the polyurethane. Another one is the steel core which is encapsulated with the rubber, polyurethane, resin or any other high strength or non-conducting material. So, there are different type of materials which can be used so as to make these type of non-conducting fish plates. Now, because we talked about the bolt hole and we said that they needs to be free of bars or the rough edges and all. So, we are talking here the bolt hole rail failure. So, there is possibility that the proper packing of joint sleeper is not there. The tightening of the fish bolts, they has to be done on an optimal level, as we discussed previously, that 20 tons tension has to be given, but if it is beyond that, if you have done more of that, then there is a possibility of failure at the bolt hole location. Now, use of shims or pre-pressed fish plates, they help in improving upon the rail failure due to the bolt hole system. Welding of battered rail hands, if that is being done, so that will also be helpful. Dehogging of rails, because if it has gone down in this form in some reason, so what we try to do is to pull it back and bring it to the normal condition. Adjustment of gaps is also required, because in some cases it may happen that the gap is this much, whereas in other case the gap has become lower or the gap has become more. So, these adjustments has to be done so that they remains within the permissible limits, and improving the fatigue resistance of the rail and the bolt holes, that will also be one of the remedial measure so that there is no bolt hole rail failure. Then the fatigue resistance of the rail and the bolt hole, how this can be improved, this is what is being talked here. What it says is that reduce the stress concentration at the rail hole. So, whatever the total load is coming and the stresses are getting induced, we need to reduce in one or the other form. Another thing is that we can increase the fatigue resistance to chamfering either by applying a pressure of 12.5 tons on both sides of the rail holes. So, you have the web and here the hole is being provided. So, on both sides of the rail hole, what we are doing is we are applying a pressure of 12.5 tons. And what it does is it introduces the compressive stress in that region, which increases the fatigue life. So, and this fatigue life, it is increasing by 3 to 4 times. So, it is a very high number. Another is the, which we already discussed, it was a cold expansion of the bolt holes, which induces the residual compressive stresses in the steel around the bolt holes, and when the thermal expansion is there, thermal stresses are induced, then they gets compensated here. Then wearing out of the fishing planes, here the wear is maximum at the center of the top of the fish plate and the minimum at the ends. Then the wear causes dipping down of the joints if it happens, and the wear of the fishing plane can be compensated by using repressed fish plates, which are bulged in the middle part of the fish plates through hot forging. So, a bulging is being done in the middle part of the fish plate. So, this is a reusing of the fish plates which were available, which have been taken out for some reason, but then again because it has still the capacity to take those loads has been used. Then another one is the using the tapered lines or shims, the steel plates shaped to fit the pattern of wear with thickness from 1.5 to 4 mm and a length as per the wear pattern. So, this is another way it can be compensated. Now, let us come to the welded rails. Now, what are the advantages of doing the welding of the two rails? The very first thing is it reduces the maintenance cost, and the reduction is 20 to 40%. It reduces the creep because now there is a higher friction and there is a big track which is being uh, connected. The rails are being connected and there are no joints as such. It increases the strength because the points of weaknesses have been reduced, and those points of weaknesses were there in terms of the joints which we have discussed previously. Then it dampens the intensity of the high frequency vibrations. So, these high frequency vibrations they will be reducing. Previously, because it was a small length of the rail which was used, so the effect of vibration is much more in that. It increases the life of the rail and it reduces the cost of construction also, because now you are using longer panels, you put them and do it welding. So, the cost of construction in terms of the use of the fish plates, fish bolts and other accessories, that reduces. What are the various welding methods which are available? The gas pressure welding, the electric arc welding, the flash butt welding and the thermit welding. So, these are the different types of techniques which can be used for welding. Now, talking about the gas pressure welding, it is a combination of oxygen and acetylene, and it is used at a temperature of 1200 degree centigrade to 1300 degree centigrade. A very high temperature is being used here. So, it is a cheaper way of doing it. It is of good quality, but then the outputs is lower. You have to use all that system at one place, then again another, and then again, and going up to the 1200 to 1300 degree centigrade. So, it takes some time. Another one is the electric arc welding or the metal arc welding. In this case, the electric current is passed across the gap, and there are different methods of doing this type of welding. They are insert plate technique, Chevron process or enclosed space technique. We are not going into the details of these type of techniques because that is not the scope of our this course, but you can read about these techniques if you are interested to learn about it. Then another important type of a welding technique which is being used on Indian Railways is Alumino-Thermit welding, also defined as AT weld. The another one is the flash butt welding, that is FB weld. So, these are the two which are prominently being used. Now, let us talk about this AT weld. This is based on short preheating process using high silica sand mold, and which is, and along with the dried, this is basically a dried carbon dioxide. So, this is one thing which is being used here, and this this short preheating, it is done by air petrol fuel mixture, oxygen LPG and compressed air petrol fuel mixtures. These are the things which can be used so as to go for preheating process. So, the rails which are going to be connected by way of welding, that they are first of all being preheated. Now, before welding, certain things needs to be ensured. Now, what it says is the end bends of the rails, they should be within plus 0.5 mm and at the lower side of minus 0.0 mm in the vertical direction and plus 0.5 mm in the lateral direction when we are using a 1 meter straight edge. So, if we use any 1 meter straight edge, say this is a 1 meter straight edge being used, then we put it along the rail and see that whether the rail is having some deviation with respect to the straight edge. Now, this is being shown here. This is a vertical profile. In this vertical profile, we are trying to see that if in the vertical plane, that means this y plane, any deformation is there, and if it is there, then whether it is within the permissible limit or not. So, what we have done, we have a straight edge being used. It has been placed at the top of the rail near the rail end, and here it is found that there is some gap which is coming. You can see that there is a gap coming here, and this gap should be within a range of plus 0.5 mm and minus 0.0 mm. So, that is the limit which is provided. Say if we talk about the another one on this side, the tolerance on the end bands in the horizontal plane. So, here what we see is on the gauge side or on the outer side, this straight edge 1 meter long is being placed, and again the deviation is being seen, and this deviation in this case shall not be more than plus 0.5 mm. So, that is the limit here, and the same is being shown in the another diagram here. So, on either of the side of this particular rail, that is to be examined. Now, by welding these second hand rails, that means the rails which are already available to you, it has been taken out, but they are still in a serviceable condition, or whether you are going for a rail renewal condition, then in those particular case the following can be considered. The obsolete or the rail older than 50 years, they shall normally not being used because it has already gone to its service life. So, if it has to be used, then the extensive testing should be done before that. Then it shall have substantial rail life available. That is what it says, that if we are already reached 50 years, then no possibility most of the time, but if it is less than that, there is a possibility that it has a serviceable life and we can use it. The rails shall be free from corrosion as well as excessive wear. So, these type of rails which are having high corrosion or high excessive wear, then those should not be used. Rail needs to be tested with USFD ultrasonic flaw detectors for examining that if there is any flaw in the rail section, either in the head or in the web or in the foot, and if it is there, whether it is within the permissible limit. If it is not so, then should not be used. And rail shall be free from cracks and internal flaws. So, if we are using UFFD, this will be going to tell us about the flaws internally. So, this is one. Now, another thing is the height of the rail and the width of the rail head, that should not be less than what. So, if in the case of a 60 kg per meter or a 52 kg per meter, if we are talking, the normal height if it is a new rail is 172 or 156 respectively, but with respect to that, if it is an old rail, then the limit is up to 163 or 150 respectively. So, that means the range is between 163 or 172 for the 60 kg per meter rail, and in the case of 52 kg per meter, it is 150 to 156. So, that is a range being given. Similarly, the width of the head of the new rail. So, we are talking about this width section. So, it is 72 or 67 respectively mm in the case of 60 or 52 kg per meter, but the reduction can go up to 66 or 61. So, that is a limit which is being defined, and if it is within those limits, then we can use it. Then another thing is the ends of the second hand rails, they should be suitably cropped so as to illuminate the fish bolt holes. So, this is another thing, that if you have used a rail which was previously being jointed by using the fish plate, so there will be holes here. So, now when you are going to weld it with another rail, then this portion needs to be cropped, and then we will join this one and this one. Then another thing is the rail ends shall be cut by sawing or by using the abrasive disc cutter and not by the flame cutting. Flame cutting if we do, then it will create the heating effect, and that heating effect will go beyond the end to a certain distance. It will create a heat zone, and that heat zone will be a problem if it is going up to a big level. Then before removal such from track, the rail ends shall be match marked so that same ends are welded. What is match marking is that if you are using one rail here and this is another rail, and then at this side there is a rail. So, we need to match mark. It means you need to know that this is going L1 and this is L1. So, the left side rail is there or a right side rail is there, this is inner side or outer side. So, that is how it has to be matched, so that when you put it back, then the same ends are going to be welded. Kings shall be removed before welding, and for kings we have seen that how in the vertical plane and horizontal plane we can check it out with using the 1 meter straight edge. and the rails of different grades will not be welded together. If at all there is a requirement of welding the rails of different grades, then the higher grade chemistry shall be used for welding these particular rails. So, when you are using say 52 versus 60, so that is what we are talking here. The rail ends shall be aligned within the horizontal and the vertical plane limits when welded. So, this is another issue that the levels needs to be looked at in the horizontal direction. So, when you see horizontal direction means here they are in the same perfect plane aligned together. In the vertical direction if you are talking, so it should not happen that one is higher and one is lower, they have to come at the same level. And again for these particular things there are uh, the permissible limits being given. Now, what are the acceptance tests for these? First of all, the visual expansion. So, that is the gang will be doing it. Dimensional checks as we discussed about using the 1 meter straight edge or the ultrasonic flood detector test, USFD testing. So, this is also another way of doing it. So, today we discussed about the insulated joints. Two types of insulated joints were discussed, and then we started discussing about the advantages of the welding and the welded joints. And then finally, our discussion was going on AT weld, and within AT weld we have discussed about certain pros and cons of using it and the types of rails which used to be used. Few other things related to AT weld we will be covering in the next lecture, and then we will be taking up the FP weld. Thank you. We will be meeting in the next lecture.